A warm welcome to the High Performance Human podcast. It's Andy here. I am absolutely delighted to have your company on this episode. My word, am I going to make it worth your while? My guest today, I am actually in esteemed company. Esteemed company. I have the absolutely incredible John Foong joining me. He is the Chief Revenue Officer for Domain. He has got an absolute breadth of experience. I was doing my homework on you, John. My word, you have been wherever the top players have been, and you have done whatever the top players have done. Honestly, it is an absolute honor to have someone quite as accomplished background as you on the High Performance Human podcast. Very warm welcome to you, John. How are you today?
I'm very well. Very grateful to be speaking with you, Andy, and thanks for having me on.
I tell you what, the pleasure's all mine, and the pleasure's all our listeners as well. That is for certain. I mean, looking down at you, Stanford graduate. You've been with Google, Uber. You were at Google for 12 years, I think, by the looks of it. And one thing that I really want to touch on a little bit later at some stage is your work in Mozambique, accelerating the economic programs over in Mozambique. Like that's a touch. I thought that was very different. Anyway,
thank you.
So, John, to give you a bit of an MO, my man, on the on how we roll here at the High Performance Human podcast, we'll get you to do a little bit of an elevator spiel, although I've given a little Easter eggs up already. And then I'll ask you the one critical question that everybody's delivering a different answer on. So first things first, John, give the listeners a little bit of an MO, a little elevator spiel on who you are and how you've got to where you are.
Sure. Well, 30 seconds or less. I'm John Foong. I'm Irish-Australian by citizenship. I've lived in all over the world, Australia, Ireland, England, Africa, and the US. I'm presently the Chief Revenue Officer at Domain, one of Australia's largest real estate marketplaces. And my job is to connect buyers, sellers, and agents so they can be confident in their property decisions. And I guess why I do it is ultimately, I think I've been here on earth to help others. That's what I'm here for. I love doing that in business, and I love doing that with my family. I'm the father of 3 girls and a beautiful American wife. My prime responsibility is to be a great husband and a great father to them. And I really love how work and family often come together to help me be a better leader. So that's who I am.
I don't know how much you're going to be in the lead when you are in a household with 4 incredible ladies. I think it's that whole mantra of leading from behind, right? It's leading, directing traffic, or basically being the baggage carrier, right? Whatever your role may end up being, man, I'm sure
there's a lot of baggage being carried at this stage.
Well, I'm sure you'll do it with absolute aplomb as well, and credit to you for that. Now, we asked this question to everybody, John, and the really cool thing is that almost every single human that's been on this podcast so far has given us a bloody different answer every time, which has made it very intriguing indeed. We are the High Performance Human podcast. I firmly believe that there are 4 key elements to becoming a high performance human, being success, influence, connection, and happiness. I'm really interested in what you've got to say about what defines a high performance human. So tell me, John, what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I reflect on this for a while, Andy, and the best word I can come up with is congruence.
Oh,
I know it's a funny word. It's it runs in mathematics of like, is this triangle congruent? But congruence to me is there is an alignment between what your goals are and what you're doing. There's an integrity about it. And for me, that congruence could be, look, I'm a Buddhist monk, and my goal is to meditate and to study and to reflect. And I'm going to do that with all my might, and I'm going to do it, with all my being. Or it could be, I'm a business person and I want to impact and make money for investors and help customers. Or it could be I'm hosting a podcast and, writing posts and, trying to amplify, great messages to thousands, millions of people. So it could be different things to different people. The important thing I ask is, are your goals and your values congruent with what you're doing? And to me, if they are, then you're a high-performing human. And if not, regardless of your performance, it's not the high performance you put on earth to do.
Oh, my life. You can tell that you thought about that one. And you have hit a home run, sir. I think that is
Thank you.
An absolutely tremendous answer. The word congruence, you're absolutely right. It just sends algebraic shudders up my spine, taking me back to A-level physics, A-level maths and physics and all that sort of stuff, when I was pretending to be clever. And I think that alignment between your goals and your values, I think it's one of those ones that lots of people, and you will have heard and seen this countless times in your journey through the corporate landscape. The amount of times that word like things like goals and terms like values and subject matter that are around values, they can really be bastardized in, especially in a corporate environment, and really overused and abused to try and try and create this thinly veiled thing of culture. But I love the fact that from an internal point of view, the congruence is such a good word for it. It really, really is. That absolute synergy between goals and values. And you can tell, right? Like, you will have felt this personally. I know that I have. You know for a fact that you are in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing, when you just don't feel any mental barriers to entry, and you just feel like you're in that state of flow, which is something that I've clung on to for dear life since I discovered it with auctioneering. And that's essentially what we're talking about here, is having that just no barriers to entry on what it is you're achieving. And it's one of those ones where when you find that, John, do you find that even though you've got your 3 kids deep and an incredible wife and all the rest of it, when you're aligned, you'll find energy?
That's right. That's right. I like your use of flow, and there's obviously a wonderful book on flow, that discusses this. But to me, flow is the output of congruence. When Brilliant. All is that it should be, then it will flow. It reminds me, I have not dated for a long time, and hopefully I'll never have to date again. But to me, I used to, when I started, I guess, seriously dating, when I met my wife, I was in my 30s. I used to see dating as like, what's the criteria? And, am I ticking her criteria? Is she ticking my criteria? It was very kind of like almost like a mission, like a thing. And actually then someone gave me advice of like, if you meet the right person, it should be easy.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want to make a categorical statement about relationships. There's very hard and difficult parts of it, and everyone finds dating different. But for me, that was very salient advice, that like when I met my wife, it was easy. There was flow. And that's because we were, I guess, 2 congruent shapes. We were right for each other, and we've continued to work on that. But to me, flow is a great output when the world is aligned, when you're doing what you should be doing, when you're congruent with your behaviors and your values.
Absolutely. And you talk about dating, it's a perfect analogy for it, to be perfectly honest. I think that's a wonderful analogy. And I recently started dating again, and it was the first time in a long time. And I'd never done the online stuff and the apps and the swipey rights and swipey lefts, and I didn't know which way was the right way. So God knows who I was swiping right and left on. And my first date with my new partner, I was like Bambi on ice. I've never been in such a you talk about flow. There was way too much flow, way too much flow. I was like verbal diarrhea. I couldn't shut myself up. It was so bad. But I see what you mean, right? I was too busy worrying about the boxes those boxes. Anyway, so now there's a couple of things that I really want to dig into with you, please, around this whole notion of high performance, because a number of people that I've had on the podcast so far, they've been business owners. They've been, very self-forging in their journeys in terms of revenue and so on and so forth. Yourself, you've really worked your way through some incredible corporate environments. Like I said, 12 years at Google. You've worked at Uber. You now find yourself as the chief revenue officer in one of the biggest firms in Australia, let's face it, right? And huge responsibilities with all of that. And of course, on your journey, you would have seen countless however many people trying to either gain promotions or, there's that sort of corporate requirement from a KPIs and making sure that the numbers don't lie and the numbers stack up and all the rest of it. Tell me, for high performance in a corporate environment, relating to your own personal opinion on it around congruence and values and goals and whatnot, how easy has it been for you to stay in that opinion around congruence when obviously there would have been countless numbers of challenges there where you've had to align with other people's goals, or you've had to, I just feel that in a corporate environment it can be, and a lot of people that I speak to find that a little bit harder when they are in a part of a bigger machine.
Yeah, I think there's many different threads there, Andy. Let me just pick up on the one on congruence. I think the responsibility that leadership have in a company is to make sure that people's interests are aligned.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, I'll just take my job right now. If I set up the sales team, and that's primarily what I run, the team that service real estate agents across Australia and New Zealand. If I set it up right, their selfish interests, that is what will maximize their financial and non-financial outcomes. If they do that, that should be the best thing for the company, and that should be the best thing for our customers.
Yep.
And again, it's my job as the architect of the customer organization to do that. And just specifically, I need to be very careful when I set the quotas. What are they getting paid on? And is it things that if they get paid on that, is that the right thing for the company, not just for our in-year earnings, but our long-term value we're trying to create? And is that really helping customers and building trust and partnership? And if I do a good job with setting targets, then actually they'll all be aligned. They're going to try and sell the products that make sense for the customers. They're not going to push on things that don't make sense. Customers will buy things. It'll be in their interests. They'll be happier. They'll have a longer and bigger spending relationship with Domain, which will give us money to make even better products. So my job is to create that virtuous cycle. And I think what you're talking about, and this is where office politics or things that come from, is where the system is misaligned, where someone goes, oh, as a salesperson, I'm going to make the best personal outcome actually by screwing the customer, right? By maximizing, by getting them to buy stuff they don't really need. And I'll get a big payout and they'll be unhappy and the company will make some money and they'll lose some money, but ultimately it's the best thing for me. And to me, I see that as a market failure. It's my job as a leader to make sure that doesn't happen. It's hard to do, which is why the behavior you're talking about is so frequent, that you get incentives for people to misbehave where their personal interest does not match the interest of the customer and the company.
I really like that. The idea of it all being very, very cyclical. It sounds fairly obvious, but when you put it into those terms, that having your players, your staff have that alignment that is very, very congruent with the purpose and the vision and the goals and what your customer wants to achieve. I mean, that is something that I think you could have hit the nail on the head there with regards to where all this politics, the in-house politics and all that sort of stuff comes from, when there is either there are too many chefs at the head of an organization, or there are way too many agendas that aren't in alignment. And I suppose I would like to ask you as a little side note to that one, from a recruitment point of view, there must be some real particular things that you tend to look for in the person that you're looking to bring on. Now, is it more from what's your train of thought? Is it right? I have these customers that are requiring someone that can help them in X, Y, and Z areas of their functionality of their business. Does this human satisfy those three things, for example? But then also, do they have that alignment with the grand vision of the company?
That's right.
Now, that must be relatively challenging, right, to get that right.
Recruiting is, I've recruited probably thousands of people in my life. And Google was famous for how they do recruiting with like these interviews, and we tried different problem solving things and kind of come to the Googleplex. And so I've interviewed thousands of people, maybe tens of thousands. I've hired thousands of people. And I would say the general best practice for recruiting that I've found is the following. You're trying to test for two things: what they can do, what the skills they have based on their potential and their demonstrated performance, and their values, their character, who they are when no one's looking. And both are really important. If either of those are off, then it's off. And I'd say on the first one, the best practice in recruiting that I try and follow is I want to try and make this as objective as possible. Because it's very easy to have unconscious bias when you're hiring. You tend to hire people who are like you, who look like you, who've got experience as you. The best way to objectify that is to say, okay, like I'll take when I hire a sales leader, I'm looking for four things: strategic agility, how well they can collaborate, their sales experience, and their excellence, and their ability as a people manager. I look at those 4 things. And based on their level, I have a set of questions that I'm asking, and their experience is relevant. So I'm asking about their past experience, and then I'm either giving hypotheticals or case studies for them to demonstrate that. And I try and get different people to test that so we can form an objective picture of what is this person likely to be able to perform against these, in this case, 4 criteria. And that's, again, that's hiring a general manager reporting to me.
Mm.
And then I try and use a diverse panel of people who have different experiences but understand the company to get a feel of what are the values of this particular person and do they align? Will they fit in with the culture? Will they add to the culture? Or would there potentially be a cultural clash? And so I'm trying to test those 2 things. I try and use the wisdom of a few experienced interviewers. And in aggregate, we try and come up with an objective decision as possible about do they have the skills? Do they have the values? Again, it's hard to do and we get it wrong 1 time out of 4. That's just what it is. But you can try and minimize that error.
But what I really, really like about your answer there is it's yeah, of course, it's EQ and IQ and value set and skill set and whatnot. That bit we can understand. The thing that I really like though about that answer was the fact that you don't rely on yourself to make the decision. You actually use your decision making in consultation with the filters, the value filters.
That's right.
Of your counterparts, of your colleagues and whatnot. And I think that's probably something that a lot of business owners either don't have the capacity to, because there might be the man at the top of, or the lady at the top of the shop, or their ego prevents them from wanting to gain the opinions of others because they think they know best.
Yeah, I mean, it's such, I guess, been a part of the organization, been a part of to these panel interviews that I definitely would, if there's any listeners out there, I'd push you to have a panel, whatever the role is. Even if just from a cultural point of view, you send the signal that we as a company are welcoming new people into our organization. And it's not just the boss's decision. I think it's a powerful symbol when there is that democratization through multiple people at all levels being on the panel. I think that's really important. At Google, they actually took the next step, maybe even too far. But we used to have the panel interviews, right? And we'd test the whatever criteria it was, and we'd test the values as well. And then what would happen is the hiring manager would need to effectively submit the hiring packet, we called it, which was the statement on paper of here's the criteria, here's what they do, here's the facts behind it. And a separate committee called a hiring committee would look at that and then judge, does this stack up? Right. So it was quite extreme, I think, in retrospect. It meant that decisions took a long time because you did interviews and you had to wait a week for this hiring committee to meet, and there might be back and forth or re-interviews or things like that. But it was all in the service of, we believe that, the sum is greater than the parts, the individual parts, that, we often need to question and look at our own unconscious biases, whether for or against someone. And that's what they were trying to get at.
And I think so if you're a small business owner, the way that you could apply that is, if you have a long-standing member of your team who is fully bought into the ethos that you are delivering and whatnot, doesn't have to be a managerial position of any real description, because your staff are essentially the custodians of your culture, right? And I think what would be incredible, and I think this is something that if we bring it into the real estate space, a lot of directors that feel that they struggle to make these decisions by themselves, or they feel that there is an inherent pressure when making these sorts of decisions. If you have a member of staff that you can trust, that that in your gut and your feeling, and that you can trust, doesn't matter whether they are the receptionist or the property manager or a salesperson or what have you, to have a second opinion from an integral, from a cultural, from a value point of view, I think it's highly critical. How many times, and I'm sure you've made this mistake, John, as well, and I know that I have, when you've hired someone that just comes in and they come in and they're all singing, all dancing, all star players, and then they just come and upset the apple cart because the cultural fit's just not there.
It's hard. It's hard to hire, and even if you take all the best practices of the world, you'll still get it wrong 1 in 4 25 times, right? But having the humility to create a process that is like, hey, how do we mitigate risk here? What can we do? I think that's a great thing.
Mitigating risk. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful. Now, I want to dig into you though, my man.
Sure.
What are your values? If you were to sum up 3 or 4 words, what are your values?
I think probably my biggest value, it's a very archaic way of saying it, but it's how I think about it. I'd call it servant leadership. right? That is for those of us who are the privilege of leading, and most of us lead in many capacities, at home, at family, whatever it is. We are fundamentally here to serve. We are given gifts, resources, education, networks in order for the betterment of other people, who in turn will pay it forward to other people. And I think that's probably the one principle that really guides my thinking about my life, about my role as a husband, about my role as a manager, is am I serving my customers and my team? Who are my customers? That's probably the biggest single value that guides on my decision making. I'll give you another value, which I was even just playing with this word, and if you asked me yesterday, I'd give you a different word. But the word I'll give you is delight. Right? And it's a funny word. It's a funny word, and it's maybe a different word for flow. But I really feel that I'm on this earth not just to help other people, but actually to enjoy it. Like I'm really here to enjoy my life. And even though you mentioned we have 3 kids under 5, it's crazy, it's mad, but it's amazing. I'm so grateful for it. And even being up late at night as we were, or in the middle of the morning, I want to delight myself in where that is, and to feel like, oh wow, I feel so lucky to be here. And I do think that is a value of mine. Like I want to enjoy myself wherever I am, whether I'm at the highest, the high, or in the lowest, the low. And maybe enjoyment isn't the right word. I want to be present. I want to delight. I want to be grateful for the moment, because one day it will be gone. And there will come a day when, those seasons are past forever for me. And I want to have known that I immersed myself wholly in those things. So I think, go for it.
I like it. I think the notion of being present is certainly something that has been touched on in a couple of episodes, and it's something that is kind of odd. because and the reason why I say odd, the reason why I say the word odd is because yes, being present is so unbelievably critical. It really is, especially when you are working with a customer, or whether it's your wife, your spouse, your kids, whatever. Being present, it's obviously something that's becoming increasingly challenging over the journey as well. When you think about the amount of bings that are going on in one's world, the amount of dings and bings that you've got going on around you, right? But the reason why I say it's odd is because to be present, and I think it more applies when you are, because being present, it's very much a self-reflective thing, right? And as a result of being self-reflective and self-effacing and self-aware of the idea of being present, the result of that, the reaction that comes from that is obviously an increased sense of being with whoever it is that you are with, right? But this is where this whole topic of self comes into play for me, and it's something that I've been toying around with, right? This whole notion of self-awareness, presence in oneself, and the whole use of the word self, it can contribute adversely as well, in the sense of we are pack animals, right? And we are supposed to be with people. Now, the question the lead up to the question I want to ask is you talk about delight, and obviously delight is it is a self prophetic thing, and it's as well as for those around you. But do you find that sometimes when you are in search of delight or being present and what have you, do you find yourself sometimes almost, I think there's a difference between being present and being in the moment, because I think being in the moment is taking into account everything. Being present's a very self-reflective thing.
Sure.
So do you feel that sometimes trying to be present and from a delight point of view, you can sometimes, and not talking about you personally, but generally speaking, there is a concern that you may actually miss what's going on for the sake of wanting to be too present in your own head?
Totally. And I think, I think of myself in the past, and I think of my own journey. And when I think about myself as a kid, imagine this little chubby boy at a party, running around, having the time of his life, eating snacks, running around, but oblivious to the mess he's making. Right? And for me, I had a very loving and caring granny who looked after me and cleaned up after me. But I probably had too much license to be that person who was so delighted in myself, but maybe wasn't present, in terms of where things are at.
Mm.
And the analogy, which I guess when I think about delight and when I think about flow, it's that notion of being on the balcony but in the dance. It's this slightly Bridgerton-esque, reference to, back in the 1800s when you're having this, party. You'd be in this house that has a dance floor and has these balconies kind of looking down, if you are, a part of the Jane Austen era. And the notion was that presence is you're on the dance floor, you're enjoying yourself, you're immersing yourself, you're in flow, but you're also on the balcony, you're seeing the people dancing, you're seeing the needs of other people, you're aware of that. And you're holding those things paradoxically in tension at the same
Yeah.
time. And I don't want to be too much one way. I don't be too withdrawn where I'm not delighting myself. I don't be too delighted myself. I'm oblivious to the needs of others. For me, flow is both.
Do you think that the delight piece comes after you have been in the moment where you get to reflect on it and go, you know what, that was amazing? Because I take, like, from my side of things, when I'm performing, when I'm in auction mode, I'm very much in flow. But in the moment, like as I'm actually doing the auction, the thing that gives me an absolute level of freedom internally and whatnot is for me, it's a 100% belief that I'm acting on behalf of everyone else and not myself. I have no standing in the transaction. Like,
Yeah.
I feel that I'm the least important person in the whole event.
Yeah.
But then afterwards is where I feel I get that delight, that reflection of my own delight, the fact that, we've knocked it out of the park, or we've got someone out of a tricky situation or whatever. But in the actual time that it's happening, my delight doesn't exist.
Yeah. And I know delight is such a funny word that I
love it though.
Yeah.
That's why I want to talk through it.
I would maybe break it down like this. To me, there are three stages of delight. There's before the event, let's say in your case, the auction, there's during when you're actually auctioneering, and there's afterwards the reflection. And I actually think a lot of good delight comes by good preparation. Like, for example, let's take the auction. You know that when you're auctioneering, you need to be all in. You're gonna be focused on reading, on reading the room, on figuring out what you're going to do, on what you might say. And so what you do beforehand is you create a set of circumstances where you can be focused in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
You are delegating all tasks that need to happen at the same time to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
You're preparing, you're reading, you're doing your research, you understand the market, where the various gateways are going to be. And so without great preparation, then if you're actually in the moment, you can't be fully in the moment, right? Because you're worrying, you're multitasking, things like that, right? And so delight requires preparation. In the moment, delight requires presence. That, okay, great, I'm prepared well, I'm now all in. I'm all in. I'm in there. And you still got to have your peripheral vision on to catch that bidder, to catch what's going on. You might have an idea, but you're all in because you're prepared well. And then afterwards, after the auction, or you're a sports person, maybe after you've retired, then you can reflect and go, wow, I am savoring on what that was, on the impact I had, on what I might do differently. So delight is probably best experienced in three stages, is maybe how I'd take your comment.
I love that. I think I'm really glad that we've dug into it, because I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head. There's different levels of delight, right? There's different stages to it in order to fulfill that delight for oneself and for those around you. And I think breaking it down, the preparation before the event, it does. And I think that's what I think you can absolutely say, that preparation is something that any high performance human would absolutely engage in prior to going into whatever it is that they're about to go into. There's only so far you can fly by the seat of your pants before you have to actually get to do some work beforehand, right?
Yeah.
I think the one out of those three that lots and lots of people, I know I do, would struggle with is the reflective piece. The smelling of roses, shall we say? In your experience, John, like I said, you've been in some incredible positions in your time, in your short time on the earth already. And by the way, you wouldn't believe he's only 21. Now, have you ever had in your own life a period of time where you've really struggled to smell the roses and do that third piece?
Yeah. Honestly, I struggle with all those three pieces. I struggle with all of them. I struggle to prepare enough because there's so much going on. I struggle to be in the moment because there's that thing I forgot, or there's just so many things going on that you're diverting some of your attention. And I definitely struggle to reflect because there's the next thing to do, or I over-index on the things that could have gone better on the post-mortem.
Right.
So yeah, it's a constant struggle for me. I think a lot of it has got to do with busyness, with just the volume of things we're attempting. And some has been, for better or for worse, we've trained ourselves to multitask, to be task oriented, to have an infinite task list, and to be doing multiple things at once. And so that does not lend itself to the contemplative life, where it's like, okay, this is done. I have a break, and I've got to move to the next one. So that's definitely it's a struggle for everyone. I think it's a particular struggle for me. One of the things I'm working on now is my calendar, for example. And my calendar looks back to back to back. I've got a customer thing. I get the fortune to cool things like this. And I've got some work to do. I've got some emails to do, meetings to have, back to back to back. And the best practice is to have gaps. A gap, even just a 5-minute gap. I'm like, okay, let's pause. Let's take a breather. Let's figure out what we want. What happened? What went differently? How do I get myself in the right frame? How do I take things slow? And that is not the life I'm living now, the contemplative life. It is the life I aspire, to lead. Warren Buffett has this interesting quote. Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they run Berkshire Hathaway, one of the biggest companies in the world, worth billions upon billions of dollars. And they joke that they don't do much. They said, we sit around a lot, we do a lot of reading. We might only take 20 actions a year, but we are very, very lazy, and we're very, very contemplative. And these are people who are moving much more capital and money and influence than I'll ever see. And they've found a way to be so reflective, right? They're just doing a small number of actions. And I don't know if I'll ever get there. And there are more investors. I'm much more of an operator. But it's that feeling, that coach rather than the intense competitor, that strategist rather than the doer, that I think is a lot of the journey of leadership that I'm trying to walk.
It's very difficult for doers, for operators to take or make that leap, right? Whether it's through fear of letting go, whether it's through a lack of inner belief that they are ready to go to that sort of, I don't want to say godlike status, but that you know what I mean? That sort of that reflective position where you can be more of a sage, more of a Yoda as opposed to a Luke Skywalker, basically, right?
Yeah.
But what do you think? What do you think you need to do? Like, in terms of your own personal development, where do you feel you need to work on? Like, what do you feel you need to work on the most in order to get towards that sort of Yoda level? Like, where do you think you are not lacking, but where do you think you are perhaps a little bit of a way off?
Yeah. I'll talk about that a little. It's something I'm obviously reflecting a lot about. My aspiration is to be more like the person I've just described, someone who has breaks in their day, someone who's not, the inbox isn't constantly full, someone who, when I come into a meeting, I'm centered. I've thought about it. I'm prepared. I'm in the zone. I'm not carrying the emotion or the frenzy or the worry from what was before. So that's, if I say it like that's what I want to move to, right? And right now, I've an amazing job, a really good life. I'm feeling there's lots to enjoy, but I'm not there. So what am I shifting? Number one, I need to get better at the top of the funnel, which is how many things am I committed to? Right? Obviously, if you commit to too many things, then you can organize your diary however you want. There's still too many things to do. So part of it is, how do I commit to less? And there's this wonderful book called Essentialism, written by a guy called Greg McKeown. You should definitely read that. And I think it's kind of totally up your alley. And he's British to boot as well, I think. But pretty much, when I reflect on what he's saying is, you should only be doing what is your highest contribution on this earth. Anything else, you should give it to someone else for whom it is their highest contribution. And for me, it is that constant triage of sifting out the good from the great that I want to get better at doing. And part of it is like, I've gotten, if I think of places like Google like tries 100 things and maybe only a few succeed and they become billion-dollar businesses. And that's very much the schools that I've been trained in. And that's really cool. That's where cool projects like Gmail come from. But it also ultimately leads to a mindset of overcommitment, of under-prioritization, and of trying too much and not going deep enough. So that's kind of one thing. That's a skill I'm working on. I think secondly, there are some mindset issues around that. You talked a bit about before about that fear of letting go. For me, a lot of my own identity has been created by that notion of I can do everything. I was described in graduate school as being omnipresent. I found a way to be at every party, everything, and I loved it. It was such a big part of my identity, and that's cool. And actually, that's a big reason of why I've been successful. How I built up my own brand, how I have a lot of contact with my customers and my team. But, what got me here won't get me there. Right? I in some ways need to turn away from that and die to that, so I can be present with the few things that need me, not the many things that could have me. And then so much of it is my relationship with my direct team. You've got to have people who are amazing, and I'm really grateful to have an amazing team under me now. And I think it's taken a while to find that fit of people who work well with me, who push me, and for other people who don't, that's not necessarily on them. It might be on me, but to help them find a place where they can be inside or outside the organization. So once you have that team, then start creating those protocols of, okay, how do we hand things off to each other? How do I make sure I don't lead and do their jobs? How do I make sure that there's a problem? If it's their problem, then they don't give me their monkey off their back. They're the ones who've got to deal with that, grow with that, go through their own struggle, their own journey. For me, a lot of that is, again, counterintuitive to what I like to do, because I want to help people, and I create value, and I get my identity from being a good coach, a good helper. But sometimes the loving thing to do is to say, okay, you got this. I'm here to cheer you on, but this is your problem. You're going to grow in it, and I'm going to stick to the problems which are for me to do, and we're both going to grow. So there's some of the kind of the stepping stones for me, I guess.
Do you think there's a small element of FOMO, the fear of missing out on the action?
Oh, I'm a big FOMO guy.
Right.
I remember when I started grad school, I was doing, I started at Stanford. I did my MBA there, and the MBA is very much a degree where like the focus is definitely on the networking and the experiential learning rather than the classroom. Whether you're Stanford, Harvard, whatever business school you might go to, that's the emphasis. It's on being around great people for 2 years and learning from them, and it's a wonderful gift. But it means that you're always missing out on something. There's a great speaker or kind of a great bunch of people who come visiting, or a study trip you could do, right? There's an infinite, if you had 20 years of business school, you couldn't fit everything that you want to do in 1 or 2 years. And so for me, on day one, they put up and go, guys, this is FOMO, the fear of missing out. You're going to have this all the time, and your job is to manage it. And I'd never heard the term before. This is 20 years ago, I guess. And for me, it's stayed with me ever since. That's something I need to fight. It's something that comes out of a place of me being that chubby kid at the party, delighting himself on all the food, but at the same time, knowing that I need to say no to things, that just because I feel afraid of missing out can't be a motivation to do it. And that continues to be my struggle, very much of why I have a very packed diary.
Big time. I feel that is probably the Achilles heel for most startups, the vast majority of startup operators and whatnot, small businesses, solo operators. They fear, the fear of missing out comes from that not a lack of conviction, but that fear of missing out on income in those early stages when realistically a lot of those things are put there by God or business or however, whatever you want to call it, to tempt us away from the path that we're on.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's certainly something that I've ballsed up on numerous occasions, where you feel like you need to be here, there, and everywhere. When, as a matter of fact, if you just focused on doing your one thing, Gary Keller's famous book, right?
Yes.
The One Thing. If you just focused on that, the depth that you can go to will serve you so much greater to a much greater extent down the track, right?
It is challenging, I think, because there are so many flowers that look interesting to smell.
Yeah.
And what might be noise to you might be the one thing for someone else. Or, and it requires great wisdom to figure out your true north. What is the one thing? And then to have the conviction to stick to it. And that's certainly something which I know a lot of startup founders will struggle with, and I struggle with too in a corporate setting.
Absolutely. And I think high performing humans are the ones that probably veer off the least. They veer off less than anybody else that's within a particular field. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you very quickly, and it's sort of related to high performance, but it's more so in a team environment more than an individual environment, is this whole topic of culture. I've got a couple of people that are going to be on the podcast as well that have got a real focus and an identity around building really strong cultures within their organization, and how that leads to high performance. Now, I've said this for a while, like if culture could have a line on the P&L, then I think it'd freak a lot of people out, right? But when obviously it can't be the case, how do you, within the notion of a high performance sort of environment, how do you tangibly, as best as you can, measure culture? Because as you've said, there's the IQ, there's what you do, and then there's the value set that you do it with. So how do you, as the chief revenue officer, where obviously, the ultimate barometer is revenue, how do you define and how do you really sort of make sure that culture is protected on both sides of the fence when you're in a tremendously analytical position that you're in?
Yeah, culture is interesting. I particularly, I think at my time at Google, 12, 13 years at Google, Google is a very culture-centric place.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, every company prides or sells its own culture. I think Google probably did the best job of capturing it. A lot of people came to work at Google for its culture. And my customers, a lot of the reason why they went to buy from Google Cloud, where I was for a while, was not because we had the best or most prominent products. Microsoft and Amazon actually had more well-used products than we did, but they wanted to capture some of that Google culture magic and be a partner with Google in that. And that was really, really important to them. It was a big selling point for us. So I guess I've thought a lot about culture, in terms of that. I would define culture as what people do and how people do it, right? So if you extract the function of like, okay, we sell these things, or it was like, how are they doing that? How are they doing that? Like, do they do it in a very directive way? Is it a slow way? Is it fast? Is it collaborative? Is it a lone wolf? The many kind of attributes you might describe it. And there's no single correct culture. There are certainly cultures which tend to be more successful and less successful. Generally, more collaborative cultures are helpful. Generally more fun and family-friendly cultures are better for retention. But that's not necessarily the case. I would say the more important thing is, going back to the original word, congruence. It might be good for an investment bank to have a culture that's very directive, that's very cutthroat, that's very competitive, because that matches the business model. It's congruent with what they are and how they treat customers and what they expect of them. For a company like the Domain, it's the culture we want to have is this excellence and family friendliness and collaboration. We want really nice people who are nice to each other, nice to themselves, nice to customers, who want to win, but not win at all costs, and ultimately help customers win, whether it's with us or with a competitor. So culture is not a single correct culture. It's about creating congruence. And the way that we, I guess, do it at Domain and how I do it as a chief revenue officer is I think about the values that would epitomize the culture. For example, we do a survey every 6 months. That is an engagement survey. We use a tool called Culture Amp on that. And there's questions around that, which are things such as, my manager is a great role model. I understand how I'm being measured. And it's a combination of questions which are generally good for all companies and ones which particularly resonate with us. And the thing I love about Culture Amp is you get this feedback every 6 months, and it's anonymous, and it's at the individual level, team manager, division, whole company. And that to me is an imperfect, but probably the best way to measure culture. Because if your culture is correct or is matching your values and what you want it to be, you should see that in the results over time. And I would say probably voluntary attrition or regretted attrition is the other measure of culture for me, of like, hey, are the people who you think are your cultural bastions, do they feel it's a place where they can be successful? And if not, then you've got a problem. And both those are imperfect, right, for many reasons. But I do we have that dashboard and we can say, okay, we think it's great, but actually, what do the people feel?
I could talk to you for a long, long time. I really, really could. Seriously, team, if you are not connected to this guy, you need to be, and you need to be very, very quickly. I can't believe how lucky I was to do my thing and shout in front of him at people and in front of John, and thankfully he found it amusing enough to want to reach out and say hello. So, John, I cannot thank you enough for. And I'm saying this wholeheartedly, for gracing us with your presence and your knowledge. You're closer to being Yoda than what you think, in my opinion. I really do firmly believe that. And I like, very rarely very rarely can I just sit back and just happily listen. But you, my man, have most certainly done that for me over the last hour or so, last 45 minutes or so. John, thank you so much for joining us on the High Performance Human podcast. The amount of wisdom and delight that you will be providing our listeners with the things that you've said today will be an absolute setting of the bar, in my opinion, and I can't thank you enough for that. Please make sure you're not a stranger to us as well. I'd love to have you come back on again.
Sure.
When the next significant thing in the world turns around. I'm sure that you're going to be one of the people that a lot of people are going to want to hear from. So I would love to make sure that we can help you do that. But John Foong, CRO of Domain, thank you so much for your time, sir. I so appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Andy. Thank you for your service in podcasts and your writing and your coaching and your auctioneering. It's a wonderful gift to our profession. And thanks for having me on.
Wonderful. Gang, stay safe, healthy, happy as always. And we'll speak to you again next time on the High Performance Human podcast. If you want to follow John, we'll make sure that all of his tags and his handles are on the show notes below this episode. You're crazy if you don't follow this guy. Until next time, gang, look after yourselves and we'll speak to you again soon.